The rain, a relentless curtain, had been Port Pharaoh's soundtrack for as long as Elias could remember. It hammered against the sterile window of the precinct interrogation room, mimicking the frantic beat of his own heart. Across the scarred laminate table, Detective Isabel Reyes held out a clear evidence bag. Inside, a pocket knife gleamed dully, its handle slick with something dark and viscous. "We need you, Elias," she said, her voice a low murmur against the drumming rain. Just one touch. Elias stared at the knife, at the dried, clotted blood that clung to its surface. He felt the familiar dread coil in his gut, a cold, clenching certainty that seeing this murder, truly seeing it, would mean losing another piece of himself. His gift, his curse, was a doorway to the dead, a horrifying echo that resonated with every brush of flesh against an object that had witnessed death. And every time he stepped through, a part of him remained on the other side. "You know the cost, Isabel," he replied, his voice raspy, a quiet plea. She didn't waver. Her gaze was steady, tinged with an urgency Elias had come to recognize, a hunger for answers that eclipsed even his own suffering. "A young woman is dead, Elias. Her family deserves to know." He closed his eyes, took a ragged breath, and nodded. The ritual was always the same. He pulled on latex gloves, a futile barrier against the psychic current, and reached for the knife. His fingers grazed the plastic. The first tremor was subtle, a shiver that ran through his bones. Then came the cold, a sudden plunge into absolute zero, and the world around him dissolved. He wasn't in the precinct anymore. He was falling, tumbling into a kaleidoscope of fleeting images. A frantic struggle, a muffled scream, the metallic tang of fear. The cold intensified, pressing in, stealing his breath. He saw her, the victim, not as a face in a file, but as a terrified young woman, her eyes wide with a desperate final understanding. He felt her terror, tasted the copper on her tongue, heard the ragged gasps for air. His hand clenched around an invisible object, the cold steel of the pocket knife somehow in his grasp, even though he knew he was only touching the bag. A wave of profound disorientation washed over him, a sense of being utterly out of place, yet undeniably present. It was as if he'd been yanked from his own body and shoved into hers, experiencing the unraveling of her life firsthand. Then, a new presence. Not the killer, not the victim, but something else. A formless shadow in the periphery of the fading light, a disturbance in the air itself. It didn't move, yet it was everywhere, an impossible geometry of malice and hunger. It pulsed with a chilling, predatory stillness, growing denser, feeding on the woman's terror, on Elias's intrusion, on the very act of dying. He felt its unseen gaze on him, a cold calculation. A whisper, not with sound, but with pure intent, slithered into his mind. Hunger. His own scream was swallowed by the vortex of the woman's last moments. He thrashed, trying to break free, to claw his way out of the suffocating darkness. The shadow thing swelled, momentarily blotting out the last sliver of light, its silent scream mirroring his own, a monstrous echo of suffering. Then, just as suddenly, it snapped. The connection shattered. Elias gasped, choking on air that felt too thin, too real. He was back in the precinct, slumped forward, his head resting heavily on the table. The latex glove was torn. A sharp, burning pain flared in his fingertips where the cold had been. His body trembled, every muscle aching as if he'd run a marathon. He squeezed his eyes shut, trying to banish the lingering afterimages. The woman's eyes, the impossible shadow, the pervasive sense of bone-deep cold. "Elias, what did you see?" Reyes's voice cut through the ringing in his ears, laced with an almost desperate impatience. He pushed himself up, his breath coming in ragged gasps. He couldn't speak, not yet. The vision had been different, stronger. The shadow, that malevolent echo, had been more present, more aware. It had felt like it was looking back at him. He swallowed hard, the taste of ash in his mouth. He came from behind, Elias managed, his voice hoarse. No struggle, just surprise. And a name, a woman's name, Maria. He closed his eyes again, shaking his head. And something else, a shadow, a cold, hungry shadow. Reyes frowned, her brow furrowed his skepticism, but she scribbled down Maria's name. She was used to his cryptic pronouncements, the fragments he pulled from the ether. But the shadow, that was new. She looked at him with a mix of concern and a strange, almost clinical interest. Elias felt a profound weariness settle into his bones, a familiar hollowness where his own memories should have been. The line between his past and the dead woman's present blurred, indistinguishable. Later, in the solitary damp of his apartment, the rain still drumming a mournful rhythm against his window, Elias clutched a mug of cold coffee, trying to chase away the chill that had seeped into his very marrow. The remnants of the vision clung to him like a shroud, Maria's fear mingling with his own. He walked through his rooms, past shelves overflowing with sealed boxes and wrapped artifacts, things he had touched, things he could never bring himself to discard. Each one a tiny, silent prison holding the last moments of a life. Every object was a potential trigger, every memory a potential echo. He sank onto his worn couch, the silence of the apartment amplifying the phantom whispers in his mind. He saw Lily, always Lily. Her face, framed by a wild tangle of dark hair, smiling up at him, her eyes bright with a joy he had long since forgotten. "Elias, catch me!" The sound of her voice, distant, ethereal. He saw them, younger, so much younger, on the wind-swept beach of Port Faro, the same gray sky overhead, but filled with the promise of endless summer. Lily, a blur of bright yellow, racing towards the crashing waves, her laughter carried on the wind. He chased after her, his own small legs pumping, the sand cool beneath his bare feet. He stumbled, laughing, and when he looked up, she was gone. Just for a second. The panic, sharp and visceral, had been instantaneous. He called her name, his voice thin against the roar of the ocean. He searched, frantically, his small heart pounding against his ribs. Then, a moment later, she reappeared from behind a jagged rock, her face streaked with sand, a mischievous grin playing on her lips. "You can't catch me!" she'd shrieked, triumphant. But the memory fractured there, dissolving into static. He reached for it, desperately, trying to hold on to the warmth, the joy, but it slipped through his fingers, leaving only the familiar ache of loss. The next time she disappeared, he hadn't found her. And the terror of that day, the cold dread that had gripped him, had never truly left. It was a wound that refused to heal, a constant, low thrum beneath the surface of his life. The shadow he'd seen today, it stirred something primal within that old wound, a connection he didn't want to acknowledge. He had to know. Despite the years of estrangement, despite the bitterness and the anger, there was only one person who might understand. One person who might have an answer. He picked up his phone, his fingers hovering over a contact he rarely touched. Dr. Eris Thorne, his father, a parapsychologist whose career had crumbled under the weight of his unorthodox beliefs, dismissed as a charlatan, a fool chasing ghosts. But he'd always believed Elias. He'd always understood. The phone rang. 3 agonizing beats, then clicked. Elias? His father's voice, older, more gravelly than Elias remembered, held a tremor of surprise, then caution. Dad? I saw something during a reading. Elias's voice was strained, hesitant. He hated asking for help, hated admitting his vulnerability. What kind of something? Eris asked, his tone shifting, now alert, analytical. The academic in him, always seeking pattern in chaos. Elias described the cold, the formless shadow, the sense of malevolent presence, the impossible hunger. He described how it had seemed to feed, to gain substance from the trauma of death. He spoke of the whispers, silent yet deafening, that had echoed in his mind long after the vision ended. There was a long silence on the other end, punctuated only by the crackle of the phone line and the distant wail of a foghorn. Then Aris's voice, low and grim. The echo. Elias felt a chill colder than any vision. You know it? I've theorized about it for years. A non-corporeal entity, a psychic predator. It doesn't just feed on residual trauma, Elias. It amplifies it, sows it. It's attracted to unique abilities, like yours. It's drawn to the wellspring of grief and fear you tap into. Aris's voice was grave. It's a parasite, son, and it's been waiting for you to open the door wide enough. Elias felt a cold knot tighten in his stomach. Waiting for me? What are you talking about? Your psychometry, Elias. It's not just seeing. It's a conduit. You don't just observe the echoes of the dead. You embody them momentarily. You become a focal point, a beacon for things that exist on the fringes. The echo, it's drawn to that resonance. It strengthens itself through the suffering you channel. It grows when you touch the darkness. A sudden, horrifying realization hit Elias. Lily, was it there when she disappeared? Aris sighed, a long, weary sound. I don't know, Elias. I didn't know it then. I was foolish. But this entity, if it's what I suspect, it thrives on fear, on the trauma of loss. And Blackwood Sanatorium, it's always been a dark place. A place of deep, agonizing echoes. Elias gripped the phone tighter, his knuckles white. The mention of Blackwood, the abandoned sanatorium where Lily had vanished, sent a fresh wave of dread through him. He pushed down the instinctive fear, hardening his resolve. He had to know. How do I stop it? He asked, his voice raw. We don't, Aris replied, his voice laced with a profound weariness. Not yet. We learn. We observe. But you must be careful, Elias. You must resist it. It will try to blur your memories with those of its victims. It will try to become you. The conversation ended, leaving Elias with a chilling premonition and a heavy burden. The echo, a name for the thing that had haunted him for years, even before he'd known it existed. And now it was growing stronger. A few days later, the rain persisted, washing the city in shades of gray. Detective Reyes called again. Another case. This time, the scene was an old, disused theater, its velvet seats ripped, its stage shrouded in dust. The air hung heavy with the scent of decay, damp plaster, and something else, a lingering, indefinable dread. A stagehand, alone in the vast, echoing space, had been brutally murdered. Reyes watched Elias with an unsettling intensity. This one, it's bad, Elias, even for Port Pharaoh. Her eagerness to push him, to expose him to ever-increasing violence, had become palpable, almost a physical pressure. It felt like she was trying to prove something, not just to him, but to herself. He picked up a discarded prop, a tarnished silver goblet lying near the victim's outstretched hand. He closed his eyes, steeling himself. He touched the goblet, the cold metal a familiar shock. This time, the plunge was immediate, violent. He was flung into a maelstrom of agony. The stagehand's final moments unfolded with horrifying clarity. The sudden blow, the searing pain, the desperate struggle against an unseen assailant in the darkness of the wings. Elias felt the man's terror, the crushing weight of his final breath, the sheer incomprehension of his own demise. And then, the echo. It was no longer a shadowy blur at the edge of his vision. It was a swirling vortex of pure shadow, almost corporeal, manifesting directly within the dying man's perspective. It pulsed with a cold, malevolent glee, drinking in the fear, absorbing the violence. Elias felt its tendrils reach for him, not physically, but psychically, probing the edges of his consciousness, seeking entry. The whispers were louder now, a chorus of distorted voices, not quite words, but pure agonizing dread. Join us, feed us, become us. He screamed. The sound was ripped from his throat, not just from the man's pain, but from his own, the violation of his inner landscape. The echo was merging with the victim's final moments, making them its moments. It was stronger, faster, hungrier. It was learning. The vision fractured, then splintered. Elias collapsed onto the dusty stage, convulsing. His body seized, tremors running through him. He was gasping, choking, fighting for air. Reyes rushed forward, her face a mask of concern. Or was it something else? Something darker? Elias, are you all right? He couldn't answer. His mind was a maelstrom of the dead man's fear and the echo's insidious whispers. They lingered, a chilling hum in his skull, long after the vision had faded, refusing to dissipate. He heard them in the silence between heartbeats, in the drumming of the rain. Closer, stronger. He spent days in a haze, the whispers a constant companion. They blurred the edges of reality, making him question his own memories, his own sanity. He saw Lily's face, not in his mind, but superimposed over the faces of strangers, her laughter echoing with a distorted, ghostly quality. The toll was becoming unbearable. He ignored Eris's warnings, ignored the creeping dread. He knew where he had to go. The whispers were leading him there, drawing him in, promising answers to the deepest, most agonizing question of his life. Blackwood Sanatorium. The sanatorium stood silhouetted against the perpetually overcast sky, a crumbling monument to forgotten suffering. Its desolate majesty overlooked the churning gray expanse of the sea, its windows like vacant eyes staring out into nothingness. The air around it was thick with a palpable sense of oppression, the very stones seeming to absorb the despair of generations. He pushed through the rusted gates, the screech of metal on metal, a jarring protest in the oppressive silence. Inside, the decay was absolute. Peeling paint, collapsed ceilings, the pervasive scent of mold and rot. Every creak of the floorboards, every gust of wind whistling through broken panes, seemed to carry a story, a whisper from the past. He moved through the abandoned wards, his hand brushing against cold, damp walls,
his senses overwhelmed by the accumulated echoes of pain, a banquet for the echo.
He found it in what had once been a children's ward, a small, forgotten room with a faded mural of a laughing sun on the wall. Tucked beneath a loose floorboard, almost hidden from view, was a tarnished silver locket. His heart leaped into his throat. It was hers, Lily's, the one she'd always worn, a tiny engraved L on its surface. He knew it with an absolute, undeniable certainty. His gloved fingers trembled as he touched it. The psychic floodgates burst open. This time, the vision was not of another's death, but of his own deepest trauma, clearer, more vivid than ever before. He was no longer an observer. He was a participant, forced to relive the very moment his life had shattered. He saw Lily, younger, smaller, her face streaked with tears, huddled in a corner of this very room. She was alone, terrified. He heard her soft whimpers, the desperate calls for him, for Elias. He felt her cold, her aching loneliness. And then he saw the shadow. Not a blur, not a formless entity, but a nascent, almost solid shape emerging from the deepest corner of the room, growing larger, darker, more defined. It pulsed with a cold, hungry energy drawn to Lily's fear. It reached for her, long, spectral fingers extending. She screamed, a small, choked sound that echoed through Elias's mind. "Lily!" He tried to cry out, but no sound escaped. He was trapped in the memory, forced to watch. The echo didn't harm her physically. Instead, it pressed in, a suffocating darkness, a psychic assault. It whispered to her, not words, but insidious currents of fear, despair, and abandonment. It was feeding, growing, its presence warping her reality, making her believe she was truly alone, lost forever. And then she was gone. Not vanished, but absorbed, assimilated. Her image faded, not into nothingness, but into the shadowy form of the echo itself, a flicker of light extinguished within its growing darkness. Elias gasped, the locket clattering from his grasp. The vision had been an unbearable truth. The echo hadn't just been present during Lily's disappearance. It had been responsible. It had taken her. It had fed on her fear, on his subsequent guilt, on every shred of his suffering. And it was still here, in this place, growing stronger, waiting. He staggered out of the sanatorium, the crushing weight of that revelation pressing down on him. The rain had intensified, mirroring the storm raging within him. He pulled out his phone, his fingers flying across the keypad. "Reyes, we need to talk, now." His voice was clipped, dangerous. "You've been leading me to these places, to it." He found her at a small, dimly lit cafe, nursing a cold cup of coffee. Her eyes, usually so keen, now seemed shadowed, haunted. He slammed Lily's locket onto the table between them. Blackwood, the theater, Maria's murder. You knew, didn't you? You knew it was there. You've been bringing me to it. His voice was low, trembling with a controlled fury. Why, Isabel? Why would you send me to that monster? She flinched, her gaze dropping to the locket. Her usual composure crumbled, revealing the raw fear beneath. I didn't know it would be like this, Elias. She looked up, her eyes brimming with tears, a desperate plea for understanding. It came to me, in my dreams, after my brother, Mateo, after he disappeared.
Elias stared at her, horrified. "The echo, it spoke to you?" She nodded, tears streaming down her face. "It showed me glimpses, fragmented images of Mateo. It promised me answers, Elias, the identity of his killer, where he was taken, anything, if I just helped it." Her voice cracked, dissolving into choked sobs. "It told me you were the key, that your gift would draw it out, that you could make it solid enough to communicate, to show me the truth." As she spoke, the air in the small cafe grew cold, impossibly cold. The lights flickered. A low hum filled the room, a resonant vibration that seemed to emanate from Reyes herself. Elias felt a sudden, crushing pressure in his chest, a wave of profound despair that wasn't his own. A shadow began to coalesce behind Reyes, not a formless blur, but a deepening of the very gloom in the corner of the cafe, a malevolent presence taking shape. It swirled, writhed, then stretched, its outline growing distinct, defined by the absence of light. It was the echo, drawn by Reyes's fear, by Elias's anger, by the raw, open wound of their shared grief. Reyes gasped, her eyes wide with terror as she saw it, truly saw it, for the first time. She screamed, a raw, primal sound that echoed eerily in the suddenly silent cafe. The echo's silent whispers pressed into Elias's mind, louder than ever, more defined, a chilling promise. "She will be mine, and you are already ours." Elias felt his own fear rise, but it was quickly replaced by a cold, burning resolve. This was it. The echo had revealed itself. It was real, and it was here. He would not let it take anyone else. He would not let it consume him.
Just then, the cafe door burst open. Aris Thorne stood silhouetted against the pouring rain, his trench coat soaked, his face grim. He held a worn, leather-bound book clutched to his chest, its pages bristling with ancient symbols. He took in the scene, Reyes trembling, Elias's haunted eyes, the terrifying, shifting darkness in the corner. His gaze locked on to the echo, a flicker of recognition, and something else, grim determination. "I was afraid of this," Aris said, his voice surprisingly steady, cutting through the thick, oppressive silence. He walked purposefully towards them, not breaking eye contact with the manifesting entity. "It's stronger than I anticipated. But I have a plan, Elias, a ritual, to trap it, to end this, once and for all." Elias looked from his father's determined face to the horrifying, expanding shadow of the echo, then back to Reyes, her body still racked with sobs. He knew, with a chilling certainty, that this would be his last chance. The cost would be unimaginable, but the alternative? The alternative was to become another meal for the silent prison of the dead. The journey back to Blackwood Sanatorium was a silent one, punctuated only by the relentless drumming of rain against the windshield and the distant, mournful cry of a foghorn. Reyes drove, her face pale and drawn, the terror of the echo's manifestation still clinging to her like a shroud. Aris sat beside Elias in the back, his ancient book open on his lap, its brittle pages illuminated by the faint glow of the dashboard lights. The air was thick with unspoken words, with fear, and with a desperate, fragile hope. "It's not a simple exorcism, Elias," Aris said, his voice low, almost a whisper against the rain. "The echo isn't a ghost to be banished.
It's a psychic imprint, a sentient scar on reality, born from unimaginable suffering. It's too strong, too deeply rooted to be simply expelled. Elias turned, his gaze searching his father's weary face. Then what is your ritual? Aris hesitated, his eyes flicking to Reyes in the rearview mirror, then back to Elias. It's a containment, Aris admitted. A vessel, a psychic anchor, within which the echo can be imprisoned, neutralized. A vessel, Elias repeated, the words tasting like ash. He knew, instinctively, what that meant. He was the only one. He always had been. And the cost? Aris admitted, his voice barely audible. You would become its jailer, its silent prison. It would be dormant, unable to feed, but it would always be a part of you, a burden you'd carry until your last breath.
Elias stared out into the rain-streaked darkness, the old sanatorium looming closer, a monstrous silhouette against the bruised sky. He felt a cold dread, deeper than any vision, seep into his bones. This wasn't a victory, it was a life sentence. But the image of Lily's terrified face, the memory of her small hand slipping from his, galvanized his resolve. He wouldn't let it take anyone else. If he could save Reyes, save others from the torment of false hope and insidious whispers, then he would, even if it meant sacrificing himself. "Tell me what to do," Elias said, his voice flat, devoid of emotion. The sanatorium's rusted gates groaned open, a lamentation in the wind. Inside, the decay was even more pronounced, the air colder, heavier. Every shadow seemed to writhe, every creak of the ancient structure a prelude to something unseen. This was the echo's feeding ground, its sanctuary. Aris began to set up, drawing intricate symbols on the floor with chalk, scattering dried herbs, arranging a circle of flickering candles. Reyes stood guard, her pistol drawn, her eyes darting nervously into the oppressive gloom. The air grew impossibly cold, the whispers in Elias's mind swelling, twisting into a malevolent chorus. Fool, sacrifice, mine. He saw Lily again, a flicker of memory. Not the terrified child in the sanatorium, but years before, small and fierce, bundled in a bright red coat, standing against the wind on the Port Faro cliffs. "Don't be scared, Elias," she'd called out, her voice barely carrying over the roar of the sea. Her small hand, clutching a weathered seashell, reached out to him. He'd smiled, a rare, uncomplicated smile, feeling safe in her presence. That image, pure and untainted, was a shield against the creeping dread. As Aris finished the last chalk symbol, he stood, his face etched with a profound sorrow. He looked at Elias, his gaze unwavering. "Elias, there's something else, something I must tell you. Before you begin." The whispers intensified, sharp and demanding. The shadow in the corners of the room deepened, pulsing with an eager anticipation. "The containment," Aris continued, his voice barely a whisper. "It works by drawing the echo into the most powerful psychic anchor present. Your psychometry, it amplifies that connection. It makes you the perfect vessel. But there's a risk, a terrible one. In the transfer, in the absorption, it's possible that you won't just contain it. You might become it." Elias felt a shock run through him, colder than any vision. He wouldn't just be a jailer, he could be possessed. He could become the very monster he sought to destroy. The weight of his father's words hung in the air, heavier than the decay of the sanatorium itself.
Eris's eyes were wet, filled with a desperate apology, a lifetime of regret. I couldn't tell you, Elias, Aris choked out, his voice cracking. I didn't want you to carry that burden, but it's the only way to stop it, to save everyone else. Reyes gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. She understood now the true cost, the ultimate betrayal. She looked at Elias with dawning horror, then with profound guilt. She had led him to this. The echo surged, sensing their fear, feeding on their despair. Its form solidified further, a towering silhouette of pure malice, its unseen gaze fixed on Elias. The whispers became a roar in his mind, a torrent of taunts, of all the suffering it had caused, all the lives it had consumed. Join us, embrace us, we are one. Elias looked at his father, at Reyes, then around the desolate surgical theater. He saw the ghosts of countless victims, the despair that permeated every stone. If he didn't do this, the echo would continue to consume, to grow, to turn others into tools of its malevolence, just as it had twisted Reyes. He saw no other way. He would gamble. He would find a third path. He would destroy it, not merely contain it. He stepped into the circle of chalk, into the flickering candlelight, his face a mask of grim determination. He held out his hands, palms up, his eyes locking on to the expanding darkness of the echo. "Begin the ritual, Father," Elias said, his voice steady, defiant. "I will not be its prison. I will be its end." Aris, tears streaming down his face, began to chant, his voice raspy, invoking ancient words of binding and containment. The symbols on the floor began to glow faintly, a pale light pushing back against the encroaching darkness. Elias closed his eyes, focusing, reaching deep within himself, not just for his psychometry, but for every memory of love, every shred of hope, every moment of defiance he had ever known. The echo struck, not physically, but with a torrent of psychic force that threatened to shatter his mind. It flooded him with the despair of 1,000 deaths, the agony of Lily's disappearance, the crushing guilt of his own inaction. He was plunged into a maelstrom of fear and regret, seeing Lily's face twisted by terror, hearing her choked screams, feeling the cold loneliness of her final moments at the sanatorium. "You failed her, Elias." The echo's voice, now a guttural roar within his skull, tore at his resolve. "You let her go. You are nothing but weakness, just like all the others, and now you are mine." He stumbled, falling to his knees, his body racked with tremors. He felt its tendrils probing, seeking purchase in his mind, trying to merge, to possess. He tasted the metallic tang of fear, the bitter ashes of sorrow. But then a different memory broke through the torrent. Lily, on a sunny morning years ago, her small hand warm in his, pulling him towards the bustling Port Faro market. "Come on, Elias, don't be so serious." Her infectious laughter, bright and clear, echoed in his mind, a defiant beacon against the encroaching darkness. He saw her bright, innocent eyes, the way she would look at him with absolute trust. He pushed back. He screamed, not in pain, but in rage, in defiance. He forced that memory, that pure, untainted love, against the crushing despair. He remembered the feeling of her hand in his, the warmth of her smile, the promise of a future they would never share. He pushed it all, every ounce of his grief, not as weakness, but as a weapon. His longing for her, his guilt, transformed into a fierce resolve to prevent this entity from ever harming another soul. The candles around him flared, their flames leaping, struggling against the swirling shadows. Aris chanted louder, his voice strained, sweat pouring down his face. Reyes, clutching her gun, watched in terrified awe, tears streaming down her face. "No!" Elias screamed, a guttural sound torn from the deepest part of his being. "You will not take me. You will not take anyone else. I am not a prison. I am a grave." He poured every remaining shred of his will into that defiant declaration, focusing all his energy not on containment, but on pure destructive force. He felt the echo recoil, its whispers turning to shrieks of pure agony. He pushed harder, using his psychometry not to channel trauma, but to unleash a counterwave of concentrated hope, love, and furious resolve. It was a psychic supernova, an impossible explosion of light and raw emotion. A blinding flash erupted from Elias, a wave of pure white energy that surged outwards, engulfing the echo. The ancient walls of the sanatorium shook. The shadow entity shrieked, a soundless scream that vibrated through Elias's very bones, then buckled, contorted, and imploded. It vanished, not absorbed, not contained, but utterly extinguished, leaving behind only a ringing silence and the lingering scent of ozone. Elias collapsed, his body trembling uncontrollably, his mind utterly drained. The profound, oppressive cold that had clung to him for years was gone. The whispers were gone. The suffocating dread had lifted. He felt empty, but free. He lay there for a long moment, gasping, feeling the chill of the damp stone beneath him, feeling the real solid touch of the floor, not the phantom echoes of the dead. He pushed himself up, his muscles aching, his head pounding. He looked at Aris, then at Reyes, both staring at him with a mixture of shock and disbelief. "It's gone," Elias whispered, his voice hoarse, but a faint smile touched his lips. "I think I destroyed it." Aris slowly approached, his face streaked with tears, a profound relief washing over him. He embraced Elias, a hesitant yet fierce hug. "You did it, son. You really did it." Reyes holstered her weapon, her hands shaking. A small, hopeful smile bloomed on her face. The crushing weight of her own guilt, the cold manipulation of the echo, seemed to have lifted. She looked at Elias, her eyes filled with gratitude, a silent apology in their depths. The sanatorium, though still derelict, felt lighter, as if a great malevolent presence had finally been expelled. He had won. He was finally free. Weeks later, the Port Faro rain was still a constant companion, but a lightness he hadn't known in years. His apartment, once a shrine to his curse, now felt like a home again. He was packing, sealing away the last of the artifacts, not out of fear, but as a final act of closure. He planned to leave Port Faro, to finally chase the sun, to find a place where the echoes of the dead couldn't find him. He picked up a small framed photo from his desk, a picture of Lily and him, so young, so full of life, standing on the beach, the sun briefly breaking through the clouds. He smiled, a genuine, warm smile, a memory of pure joy, untainted by the shadow. He walked into his small bathroom, splashes of water still clinging to the mirror from his shower. He paused, looking at his reflection. His face, usually shadowed with weariness, seemed clearer, his eyes brighter. He looked healthy, rested, finally at peace. He looked like himself, but a version he hadn't seen in over a decade. He smiled again, a soft, contented smile. Then his reflection rippled, just for a fraction of a second. The light in his eyes dulled, the contours of his face sharpened, twisted. His features elongated, becoming a silhouette of impossible angles. A deep, predatory grin stretching across his mirrored lips. The shadowy, malevolent form of the echo stared back from the glass, its eyes twin points of ancient, chilling hunger. Then, as quickly as it appeared, it vanished. The reflection was normal again. Elias Thorne looking back at himself. But his own smile, the one that had been so warm, now lingered. It was wider, colder. His eyes remained bright, but there was an unsettling glint in their depths, a subtle, almost imperceptible shift in his gaze. It was a smile that didn't reach his eyes. It was a smile of satisfaction, of possession, of hunger.